Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Kristen Lays. I'm the Executive Director here at Belle Grove Plantation, and I've been at Belle Grove since 2013. And when I first started, my first day with my predecessor, I was given a tour of the entire manor house. I had been as a tourist before, but this time she took me into the attic. So I was actually amazed. I had no idea that when I walked in there that there would be so much graffiti. And I had previously come from a job that specialized in historic preservation and preservation of collections. And my first thought was, oh my goodness, this is kind of vulnerable. If we would have a roof leak or some other issue, we could lose all of this information. So that year we had actually had a special initiative. So Belle Grove is one of the 27 sites in the National Trust. And we've been a part of the National Trust portfolio since Belle Grove was bequeathed to the National Trust in the 1960s. And so open as a museum since 1967. And the National Trust that year had a special mini grant to do little innovative projects. And so I proposed documenting all of the graffiti in the attic. So we did it through a video and we did it through high resolution digital photography. And from that, we were able to utilize our volunteers to help transcribe all of the graffiti and create an index. So that provided a wealth of information, as I will show you today. So we don't typically have the attic open when you come as a visitor, and that is primarily for safety reasons. Our fire marshal has let us know, since there is no emergency exit from the attic, that it's really not a safe thing to do on a regular basis. As you'll see from the stairs, some people, if you have any issues with vertigo, do not like, or claustrophobia, would not be a fan of the stairs. And when we give tours, we do like to get up and personal, but we don't like to split the group. So, for some people who wouldn't be able to do the stairs, that would make the tour awkward. Some people would be gone for a while. And so that would make the tour flow very strange. And then the last reason we don't have people in the attic often is we use authentic lime plaster in the house. So if we have a lot of load up in the attic, it could be challenging for our ceilings. So, so that's sort of the reason why on a day-to-day tour, we don't include the attic. I do tell people when I give them a tour of the manor house that there's a secret code word. If you ever hear Belle Grove advertising a quote behind the scenes tour, that is kind of code for we'll let you in the attic. And in those cases, we limit the number of people that go up there. We always have a volunteer down at the bottom of the stairs to assist people. They'd need to let us know there was an emergency so we could evacuate quickly, etc. So that's how we're able to do it on occasion. And certainly if you would ever come for a director's tour, that would be included as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to show you a brief video that I shot this morning just to give you a look. As I said, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We should have ample time for Q&A. If you are really disappointed that we're not going with live video into the attic, you can convince me, and I'll put on my coat and I'll take my iPhone and we'll march over there and climb up the stairs together and show you around. But hopefully this short video gives you the flavor of the space. So I'm going to hopefully share this. Yeah. Okay. So let me know in the chat if there's any issues with hearing or seeing this video. It is going to be this vertical, since I shot it with my iPhone, it's just this vertical screen right in the middle. So if you are in the hallway at Belle Grove in the manor house, this doorway is to the attic. We're going to go up these stairs. They are about 3 feet by 3 feet. This stairwell, and it's a tight curve. basically holding onto the walls. So we walk up here, and you can see the old plaster. And I'm basically turning in on myself to come up these stairs into the attic. It's pretty spacious. I'm about 5'10", and it's no trouble for me to stand here easily. This is the front portico, out the view. Out today, and the iconic symbol of the arch. And then this is the other portico, and we'll look at there in a minute. So the graffiti is what's of interest, and you can see right in that stairwell, we have a high density of graffiti. I think because it was an easy place to just run up and write your name. So this is the most dense wall right here, and we'll talk about that in more detail. These initials were done with the soot of a candle. So that was one way to, obviously pencil and pen are the most common ways people have signed their name. I'll picture there. And so this is the other portico. Now that soot that you saw in this area, we have had to support the plaster in here. It was coming down, and there is graffiti on some of that plaster. So this was covered up. We have not taken down these supports to take a look at it. I do have a photograph, and it shows with that soot, U.S. Signal Corps in big letters on this side of the portico. And we're going to talk about, I'm not going to crawl in there now, but I'm going to talk to you about the graffiti that's on that far wall. It's some of the most interesting graffiti, and we'll look at close up in pictures. Just wanted you to see and experience what the space is like. No heat source though, I'm freezing. And we have done things up here in the summer where we are really, really hot. So we do not think it was any kind of permanent living space. We think it was storage space. These short doors go onto the wings. So it's just dark in there. As you can see the chimneys. And well, totally dark in there. I don't have the light for you. But you do go into the wings, and that's much lower space, and you see the tops of the chimneys. Otherwise, these are just some closets that were put in. So we do think this was storage, primarily used for storage space up here, but not living quarters for anybody. Though we know many children over the years who've lived at Belle Grove have played in the attic. So that's all. Thanks. Okay. So I'm going to, I've got a PowerPoint here, and I'm going to walk through these slides and talk to you a little bit more about each one. And as I said, feel free, if you have any questions that come to mind, feel free to put that in the chat, and we'll use that as our Q&A in a little while. Let's see. To figure out how to advance my slides here. There we go. So as I mentioned in the video, this wall, when you come right up the stairs, is really very dense with graffiti. And I think it was for a couple of reasons. As I mentioned, perhaps when you're quickly coming up to write your name on the wall, this would be your first accessible spot. The second reason is it could have been actually full with a lot of stuff. So actually, when I started the project to document all of the graffiti, one of the bigger challenges was working with the staff to clean out that whole area. That was not an easy task. We had, over the years, there had been a habit of putting bankers' boxes of papers and things like that in the attic. That wasn't great for a lot of reasons, not really great papers, and it's a fire hazard, and it's a load on the ceiling, et cetera, et cetera. So that truthfully was a huge task, was to make sure that this was not being used as excess storage. And then we went around, and Rick Foster, who's a local photographer, worked with us to take really close-up pictures of each section of the walls. And from that, we used a system, picture by picture, for volunteers to transcribe everything that was written. So that was great. We had 557 signatures or little bits of writing. And not everything includes a date or a name or a place that the person was from. It really just varies. So we just really made sure to record just about everything that we could. And you can see a little bit, some of the signatures are very large, some of them are very small, some of them run into each other. So it was a little bit of a challenge, but we do have that transcript. I put it in the chat through our website, and these images are in a Flickr page where you can look through. It depends on your interest in this. If your interest is finding if someone signed the attic, if you live locally, you might want to start with the index, and that way you can look for names. It's sorted by last name, and you can look for names that might interest you. Or if you're a Brumback family member, a former member, owner of the house, or Height family member, you might want to start by name. If you're just sort of interested in flipping through it, you might just be wanting to look at the Flickr database and just flip through picture by picture. So we have some early signatures. So Belle Grove was, this manor house was constructed between 1794 and 1797 by people who were employed or enslaved by Isaac Height Jr. And he was a grandson of one of the first settlers of our area, the Shenandoah Valley, European settlers, I should add. So we really don't have any graffiti in the attic before about 1857. That's the earliest, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We have a handful that have other early dates, but I have been able to dismiss them as erroneous or for some other reason. So for example, we have a signature from Edgar Allan Poe. And I think that this is a joke. It says 1879, and he actually was dead by 1849. There's no record that he visited Belle Grove. I think the handwriting itself looks a little more contemporary. So I think this is a humorous writing on the wall. There was another one that it's got an 1864 date, a Civil War date, and a local, a longtime local who is also a docent had mentioned that was her family doctor, and he was a jokester, and it would be just like him to put those dates. There's more to that story perhaps that we could investigate, but again, you have to sort of sift through which is a sort of truly older signature and perhaps somebody else just using the date. And we have a whole range. So we really see the heaviest amounts of signatures are when the Brumback family owned Belle Grove. So the very early part of the 20th century. So 1908 till about 1929 when they sold it to the last private owner of Belle Grove, Francis Hunnewell. And they operated Belle Grove as an inn for a while. We know they opened it to tourists. And so they, we see a heavy amount of graffiti from that era, a lot in the 19-teens and 1920s. There might have been parties and people would come up and sign their name. There may have been tourists that came through and got a tour. There might have been Height family members that came back to visit and got a tour, wanted to sign their name. So here we have this big scrawling signature here, and it's Jim Shader visited here on his way to Luray Caves with the gang from Yonkers, April 7th, 1925. That's kind of typical, a typical tourist signature. And if you don't live locally, we're on a series of caverns here in the Shenandoah Valley. And so a number of them are open as tourist attractions. So the Ray Caverns is one of the more impressive and famous ones. So yes, so he was out touring. And then, and then we do have some contemporary ones as well. So this is the one that I have found that is the most recent. So Chuck and Becky Johnson on April 8th, 2011. So we definitely have a whole century worth, over a century's worth of graffiti, but mostly from the last 100 years. So these are throughout that room that I showed you in the video. But this area is the area that I didn't want to crawl into, and it's the portico. And you can see pretty densely covered around the window, something that may look like bullet holes, and I'll get to that in a minute. And this is the oldest signature that we think we have authenticated as being old. So this says there's two sets here, and it starts off with Maggie A. Height and O.C. Shipley, December 6th, 1857. Off to the side is another signature. It says Ida Shipley, daughter, August 9th. So did Ida come later and write her name down and she visited it on August 9th? Did they come back later and write down that they had a daughter on August 9th and they wanted to record that along with their names? And then unfortunately, O.C. Shipley signs his name again on March 1st, 1861, along with a little statement. It says, I am here now alone, and thy art gone to God. Memory reverts to the pleasant hours spent with you, dear departed Maggie. So very sad. We take this to mean that they were a couple, and later, between 1857 and 1861, something has happened and she has passed away. And so we have done a little more research because the Height family name is, of course, associated with Belle Grove, but we haven't been able to necessarily trace her to the Height family that lived here. It's not an uncommon name in the Valley. She was the daughter of Philip Height, who was a tailor in Middletown, which is where Belle Grove is located, just south of Middletown, Virginia. But O.C. Shipley, however, is related to the home. He was the brother of a woman named Hetty Shipley, who married into the Cooley family, who owned Belle Grove right at the time of the Civil War. And in fact, they got married in 1857. And so we do think that she married Benjamin Cooley on December 3rd, 1857. So this December 6th of that same year corresponds, and sounds like her brother has come for some wedding celebration or to see his sister soon after her marriage. So that is definitely related to the home. It is curious that this was the first signature we found, because we're not sure if this would have necessarily started the tradition of signing the attic. We really thought it was more of a Civil War tradition. Okay, oh, sorry. So this is an example of a Civil War signature. As I mentioned in the video, we have on the sloping ceilings of the portico, U.S. Signal Corps in really large letters. And this is William E. Gant, Signal Corps USA, May 19th, 1864. So the signal, you could see out that window that desperately needs to be washed, I apologize, that we have a direct sight line from Belle Grove to a mountaintop. And that is a range that is in the middle of the Shenandoah Valley called the Massanutten Range. And we're right at the blunt end of it. And so there's a great lookout up there. And they called that Signal Knob during the Civil War. And they could use flags and lights from that high point to send messages to people down in the valley. So we had always been told that Belle Grove, through that front window or through another access point out of the roof, that they could do signaling up to the signal knob. And in fact, we have wonderful pictures of that direct sight line, so you can see down to Belle Grove. So it makes sense that Signal Corps would have been in the attic, maybe doing those activities. And this is a gentleman, William Gant, and he did a little more research on him once we found this name, and found out that he was born in Pennsylvania and enlisted in the Signal Corps of the Union Army, went on after the war to become a school teacher in Perry County, where he lived in Pennsylvania, and then went west to Iowa, and then ultimately studied law in South Dakota and had a law office in Nebraska, where he remained until his death. So, so just because we had a little bit of information, his name is not completely usual, and we knew he was in the Signal Corps, we were able to find resources where we could learn all of this about him. So what we usually start with, if you're ever interested in doing Civil War research like this, is the National Park Service has a really useful website called Soldiers and Sailors. And you can type in a name and any information you have and get at least some of the basics of the military record about an individual. And then from there, that tips you off into going into other resources, such as regimental histories of each regiment. So if you have that, you can get a pretty decent amount of information, pretty much without leaving your computer screen. So this is how we were able to learn a little bit more about him and where he was from, and then got a little bit of information from this History of Perry County, Pennsylvania, about his life. And then we have a story from the other side of the war. And this was, when we were doing the transcription, handwriting is a challenge. And this handwriting was very interesting. It was, very elaborate, but it was basically readable, except his first name was a little bit garbled and his last name was a little bit garbled. But what we could see more clearly is that he was a private in County F of the 8th Regiment of Louisiana Volunteers. And so that really was the tip off. From there, we could look into regimental history, knew exactly what we were looking for. Louisiana, the 8th Division, Company F. So the funny thing is that we could see Louisiana, which means he's Confederate. And then we saw this June 1862. So the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia being a place that grew wheat, and Belle Grove was a wheat and grain plantation, also livestock. But its primary industry was wheat, and that's how the money was made. And so being the, quote, breadbasket of the Confederacy, the Shenandoah Valley was hotly contested real estate during the Civil War. We're very close to the front lines. So if you are at Belle Grove, I know we have people from all across the country here, but if you are at Belle Grove today and you drive about 25 minutes, you'll be in now what's the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. It was Virginia during the Civil War. You drive another 15 minutes, you're going to be in Maryland. If you drive another 20 minutes or so, you'll be in Pennsylvania. So we're not very far from this very contested front line during the Civil War. Driving today, you're about 3 hours from Gettysburg, about 2 hours from Antietam-ish, depending how you drive, and Richmond as well, and Washington, D.C. It's about within that 2 hour radius. So you can see we're close in, and yet behind a screen of the Blue Ridge Mountains. So this made it also a really important corridor for north-south movement. And our Route 11, which is also called the Valley Pike, which is just outside of Belle Grove stores, just down our small road, was one of the few paved roads in the country. So it's in a very strategic location. But we knew from the different troop movements and activities that this private really shouldn't have been in this part of the valley in June of 1862. The battles that had been fought, it was a very active time that summer, but the Confederates were in retreat by June. And so that was a head scratcher. But what we were able to do, as I mentioned, is go to the regimental history. So the Louisiana Volunteers Opelousas Guards was the Company F of the 8th Regiment. And from there, I could just scan a list of names, and it became just so clear that when we saw his name in writing, yes, this is the gentleman. It's Leonce Sandoz, or Leonce. I'm not sure exactly how that's pronounced. His parents were actually Swiss. And he lived in Opelousas, Louisiana, and enlisted in Company F of the 8th Regiment. They participated in battles of Front Royal, which is a town about 20 minutes to the east of here, and Winchester, which is a town that's about 20 minutes to the north of here. And he was taken prisoner on June 18th, 1862, near Middletown, and then later was transferred to Fort Delaware. So this becomes very fascinating. Could he have been held a prisoner in the attic? As you saw in the space, that's one of the few windows. June is going to be rather warm in the attic. I don't know how much freedom of movement he might have been given, but if I had been in the attic, held prisoner, I'd want to be close to a window for a lot of reasons, for air, for light, for space. And this signature is just to the right of that portico window. So he was released. There was a prisoner exchange, and he was released later in that summer. He returned to the Army. He fought at Sharpsburg. He transferred. He was captured again. He had a really elaborate wartime history. But after the war, he returned back to Louisiana and became the editor of his local newspaper. The masthead is here. His father had been the editor, and he remained such until his death. So this was information, again, that we were able to confirm who he was through the regimental history, and then additional information regimental histories gave us his biography. And then this is just underneath his signature. So you can see in the very upper right-hand corner that F in the 8th Regiment Louisiana Volunteers, and we have a big heart, and his initials LS. And he quotes a poem from Byron. Here's a sigh for those who love me, and a smile for those who hate, and whatever skies above me, here's a heart for every fate. And so that is a poem that Lord Byron wrote to his friend Thomas More. It's the second stanza. So, you know, is this his way of passing time? Is it his way of perhaps saying farewell? He doesn't know what his future is. I don't know how he might have been treated if he was a prisoner of war. Elsewhere on that wall, however, around that portico window, we do see some errant marks. So we have some things that could be a hash mark with a piece of charcoal pencil or graphite, possibly something that looks like it could be scratched in, if you can see on the right, maybe incised in with something. Is this, again, someone being held prisoner in the attic? Are they marking the days? I do not know. We really do not know. There's really no way to know that. I guess a couple of ways we could figure that out is if we tried to find any family members, descendants of Mr. Sandoz, and maybe there was oral history that was in the family, or additional information. Now, the interesting thing about the two gentlemen that we talked about on the Union side and the Confederate side is they survived the war. Is that a coincidence? We have a few other signatures from the Civil War, and we did research on them, and they were also managing to survive the war. Now, we do know something about Belle Grove's history in that this was a site for Civil War reunions. So here's another signature that says T.H. Allen Signal Corps, but he signs 1914. 1914 would have been the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Cedar Creek, which was this really intense conflict that took place literally on Belle Grove's grounds. I like to say came in the front door and went out the back door, and then came in the back door and went out the front door. So it was a Confederate surprise attack on Union troops that were encamped all around Belle Grove, and Belle Grove was being used as Union headquarters at the time. It had heavy casualties, and it's the second largest Civil War battle in the Shenandoah Valley. So here we have a reunion that took place at Belle Grove because Belle Grove was the centerpiece of this battle. And so we have some signatures that we can attribute to veterans coming back for one of these reunions and then signing the attic. So, you know, the fact that the two signatures I've discussed with you are people who survived the war, is it possible they've signed the attic after the fact and put the dates that they were in the area or they were at Belle Grove? Again, hard to say for sure, but an interesting memento and a real insight into a little bit more of the history of our property. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll get to those at the end. We do have, so we have signatures from the Height family. So Height family members, as they would come back and visit, and then obviously the tradition of signing your name on the wall of the attic had begun to happen. They joined in at that point. And so here, if you can see scrawled in really large letters, Cornelius B. Height. And he is the son of the youngest of the Height children. So Isaac Height Jr. married Nellie Madison, sister of President James Madison. And they were married and had 3 children together. 2 lived into adulthood. And unfortunately, she passed away in her 40s, and he remarried Anne Morey, and they had 10 children. So Cornelius Baldwin Height is the youngest of those. Actually, it's Cornelius Baldwin Height Jr. Is the signature here, but his father is the youngest of that second marriage. And he, in fact, never met his father. His father died in a accident when he was out hunting, and his wife was just newly pregnant, and it would have been a son, Cornelius B. Height. This Cornelius B. Height did, however, go on to serve in the Confederate Army during the war and lived actually to the ripe age of 101. And he's buried in Richmond, Virginia, in Hollywood Cemetery. Here is another Height descendant, Cornelius Height Fauntleroy. You see that we use the same names a lot in the Height family, of St. Louis. And he writes that he wanted to write great-great-great-grandson. And he came in the 1916 of Major Isaac Height. So wanted us all to know in perpetuity that he had visited. And this is a close-up on some of those holes around the portico. You can let me know if you've got more information on ballistics than I do, but I would think a bullet hole would have done more damage than this, but I don't know. I just sort of wonder if some of those reunions got a little rowdy, but it's sort of a mystery. We also have a lot of humor in the graffiti. So Kilroy came twice. If you are familiar with that adage, I think it's a World War I tradition of writing Kilroy was here on walls. So we have 2 examples of Kilroy was here within these 500 plus signatures. We have a lot of love documented in the signatures. Here's one from the 1985, Denise J. and Tommy C. Some poetry. The sea may rise, the mountains may fall, but my love for you will stand through it all. And then you can see in the lower left, that relationship must have not ended well or something, but someone came back and wanted to obliterate whatever it was that was written there. So we have lots of examples of that. Lots of examples of some school trips, kids who would come on school trips. And then this is one of the more interesting ones. Again, the handwriting on this was terrific. When it came to doing all the transcription, we really struggled on some of the handwriting or some things that were faint. But this person's handwriting was very nicely done. The only thing is I really couldn't make any heads or tails out of the language in here. So I did what we all do. I put it into Google to see what would happen. And turns out that this was a gentleman named Viggo Asmussen, and he was the first foreign exchange student that came to Strasbourg High School. And Strasbourg is the town about 10 minutes south of here. And he had been recently written up in the newspaper, or local newspaper, and because he had returned for his 50th class reunion. And he, apparently had a really wonderful experience, stayed close with people in Strasbourg, and had never missed a reunion, except for 2. So every 5 years he's been coming back. So actually I should look that up and see if he's coming back anytime soon. So here is a June 1972, and I'm thinking he was coming back for one of his reunions because he first came in the 1960s. So he became a teacher as well, and settled in Denmark. And as I said, I haven't reached out to him, but we certainly could. For people who have found family members or have other things of interest, we were happy to provide a photograph of their signature. And we've had a number of our volunteers or members, once we did the transcription, not realize that family members had signed the attic. And so that was a really special part of the project, was helping them sort of connect or learn a little bit more about their family. The Brumbeck family, we have 30 signatures associated with them through their ownership or through reunions. That's another thing. The Height family and the Brumbeck family come back to Belle Grove for reunions, and you can clearly see patterns in the graffiti that everyone said, hey, let's head up to the attic and sign the walls. So it's really a living guest book in some ways. Though we have stopped the practice, we do have a book that we hand people instead, a blank book for them to sign. So that's basically the end of my formal presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now, unless we want to go back and refer to anything. But we have plenty of time for questions. So it says, though the Poe signature isn't authentic, it's still appropriate to start with that on his 212th birthday today. I did not catch that. So thank you, Tony, for letting us know that. That's a little bit eerie if you think about Poe. But hey, that's also really exciting and neat. So thank you. Yeah, so Georgia asks, is it possible to analyze the materials for potential dates? I'd have to check with some conservators to see if that's possible. So I don't know if that's technically possible, or if we have enough of a sample to determine that. But we can certainly look into it. So it says, what was the signature date of the Confederate soldier again and the date he was captured? I don't know the date he was captured, but they said he was prisoner. And let's see, I'm gonna flip back here. He had just said June, and our data said that he was taken prisoner June 18th. So I think, yeah, it just says June 1862. There's no date given. So yeah, we didn't. I hope that answers that question. Yes, and if you'd like to share this with anyone, I'm going to put the recording on that web page, I hope, or at least a link to it. So if you have any other questions, let's see. It says, you mentioned the Civil War graffiti could have been written after. Are there other signatures by soldiers who died to confirm that the signature is being added during that time? The couple other signatures that we might have that are Civil War related were names that were pretty common, and there wasn't that additional information of who they served with. So that made it a little harder to narrow down the biography. We certainly have, if we've sparked your interest and you want to do a little research project, we certainly have some loose threads, some little bits of information that if someone wanted to delve into it further, we might be able to get a little more insight. But yes, that would be one thing, is if we had a signature of a soldier who then perished during the Civil War or before those reunions took place, that could confirm that these are dated to the Civil War. All right, well, if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to put it in the chat or unmute yourself and ask, or just a comment. We're happy to hear more about it. And I can put in the chat again the link to our website if you want to look at it anymore. You're also welcome to email us at info@bellegrove.org. If you're interested in anything, if you see something you would want a copy of the photograph, or if you want to do a little research project, there are a couple, as I said, a couple loose ends we could always look into a little further. I think we had one Civil War soldier, his name was something like Joe Jackson, just a really very common name. So so you'd be looking at a lot of names in order to isolate the individual that might have fought in the Valley or in one of these local battles. So so it's fun. It's fun to see some of the tourist signatures. This really sparked a lot of conversation with some of our older members who are Brimback descendants or have other connections to Belle Grove. It sort of sparked some conversation and a chance to gather some oral history from them, as they knew local individuals who had signed their names or family members who signed their names. And so that was a really fun aspect of the project as well, was making sure not only did we just capture images of this on the wall, but also the meanings behind it. Because unless you have some of that insight, there wouldn't be any sort of clarity. So for example, the woman who said, oh, that was my family doctor and he was a jokester, and it would be just like him to write 1864 under his name. That's typical Dr. Hopewell. That's typical of him. So so that was a useful insight. It was fun when another docent said she was so excited to find her mother's signature on the wall, but the name right next to it was as a man's name, and she said, and it wasn't my father. So she had clearly brought a date to a party. They have both signed their names. If you are a historic preservation buff, and if you heard about us through the National Trust email, thank you for joining us again today. You may have heard of the Historic American Building Survey. It was a huge effort started in the 50s and 60s to document historic structures across the country. And Belle Grove benefited from that program in the 1970s when architecture students came for the entire summer, and they did drawings of the buildings and the details, architectural details, and all of those drawings and all of that information is stored at the Library of Congress under the Historic American Building Survey, or they call it HABS, H-A-B-S. So it's free for anyone to see and to look at these historic structures from across the country. So we were amused when we saw signatures on the walls from those interns in the 1970s. And one of the people who was an intern starting off in her career has now since become the head of preservation of the US Capitol. So, so is very still active and prominent in the field. So that was an amusing thing. But again, they wrote their name and they wrote HABS. And because of my background, I knew what that meant. Someone a generation down from me or others might not have had that insight. So that was the other reason it was important, not only to physically document the artifact, but also to get it transcribed and to get us thinking about the content of the information, because you start to lose some of those meanings. So, okay, does anyone have any questions? Okay, well, again, if you would want to reach out to Louisiana and see if you can find a descendant of Mr. Sandoz or Private Sandoz, or I had a private message from one of our volunteers and members who said next time they're in Denmark, they're going to look up Viggo Asmussen, which is great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to have another Zoom on a Tuesday at noon. This will be on February the 9th. And again, if you go to our website, which is bellegrove.org, BELLEGROVE.org, this one will be on some of the our archaeology we've been doing in the enslaved quarter site. So Matthew Greer is the lead archaeologist on that project, and he specializes in ceramics. Ceramics is a significant portion of what he has found in doing this archaeology. They have 53,000 artifacts to date, and he really hasn't excavated that large an area, to be honest. It's been very targeted digging, and so that's a very high volume of artifacts. And he's been doing extensive scientific analysis on the ceramics. And so he's going to give a presentation on Tuesday, February 9th from noon to 1 Eastern on some of that analysis and what it's teaching us about the daily life of the enslaved. So Belle Grove, the family that lived at Belle Grove from 1783 to about the 1850s, enslaved 276 individuals. And we know some information about them, but this archaeology has really been telling us a lot more about their daily life. So Matt will present on some of that. We are trying to record all of these webinars or talks, and we will post that on the website. And I'll do a follow-up through the system you used to register for it today, with a link to the recording from today if you'd want to share it with anyone. Did get another question from Georgia Falkenberg. Was Belle Grove ever used as a Civil War hospital? So yes and no. Immediately in the aftermath of the Battle of Cedar Creek, we know wounded were brought into the home. It wasn't used for very long. So it was a field hospital in a way, not used in any kind of long-term way. But certainly after any major battle with the kind of casualties that they had at the Battle of Cedar Creek, every building was a hospital. So we were aware of that taking place, but the written evidence talks about it being on the lower level of the manor house. So I see a question.
Yeah, I'm just going to unmute Sue Ackerman here from West Granby, Connecticut with my husband, Jim Rook. And so you came in 2013, you said?
Yes.
And it's just such a curiosity to have this attic full that, and are you the first one who started looking into this? Because it's
Yeah.
fast.
I'm not, yeah. I'm sure others were fascinated too, and would go up and tour it, and obviously go up and let people say their names. So I know it's been a fascination for a lot of people for many, many years. I'm sure, just like my plate is so full right now, I'm sure it was one of those someday we'll do this projects.
Yeah.
And it was fortunate that, I mean, the National Trust, it was just nice timing. The National Trust had this mini grant, and I was, new, and my plate hadn't gotten so full. And I thought, well, this is a great opportunity just to take this opportunity. At the very least, I mean, we were fortunate to get the transcriptions done, but I thought just at the very least, let's just grab it. Let's just get that high-res photography. And truthfully, the high-res photography really helps a lot when you're trying to do that transcription, because you can enhance the images, you can blow them up, you can look at them on the computer in different ways. And even more, I would say it's a little bit easier than standing there at the wall and doing it. Also, the photograph is just one screen, and then you kind of capture everything in that screen and then move on to the next one. So it can make it a little easier to focus as well. So I think that technology has really helped.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. And yes, I can, in my follow-up to this, I will send you the information about how to register for the February 9th webinar. And Georgia has a follow-up on the Civil War era at Belle Grove. There was a family living here. The Cooleys were living here. Benjamin and John were two brothers that co-owned Belle Grove. And we know that their sister, Rebecca Gordon, was in the house and staying in the house with her children. Her husband had died in the Civil War of disease, but early on in the war, he had died. So she's a widow and there with her children. So they were in the house during its Union occupation. And I do believe the Cooleys, I don't have any evidence they're necessarily Union leaning. Her husband fought for the Confederacy. So my assumption is that they're Confederate leaning. And I don't really know, we don't really have information of how they might have been treated, but basically Philip Sheridan, who was the commanding Union officer at the time, they were camped here. And then obviously in the ensuing Battle of Cedar Creek, he was using Belle Grove's manor house more as an office than living quarters for soldiers. He had his tent on the front lawn and felt it was important that he camp as the men camped. So, but we know we have some oral history about the family being in the house and how frightening it was to have the battle raging all around them. So, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and your time and attention. And if you have any lingering questions and you want to put it in the chat, be happy to answer them. But otherwise, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'm so excited. We had people from sea to shining sea on this Zoom call today, from California to Connecticut, and all in between in Massachusetts. So, so that's always really fun to see. And if you're ever able to travel again, we highly recommend the beautiful Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. If you're visiting Washington, D.C., we're just 2 hours to the west. And Shenandoah National Park is a wonderful, and Skyline Drive is a wonderful attraction that a lot of people like to see. And we have many small towns dotting up and down the valley that are charming. They're gaining a lot of popularity right now as people come out of, want to just get a day trip out of the city during COVID. And then if you like Civil War history, we have many sites, many battlefields. every inch seems to be a battlefield. So more Civil War history than you could ever want right here. So thanks again for joining us. Have a great day, everybody.